to My Brain is a Wonderland Season 2. This is a podcast for neurodivergent women and the people who love them. I'm so glad you're here with me, your host Emily, today. I just wanted to preface this episode with, if you are new here, I would love for you to go back and listen to the first 2 episodes of Season 1. They outline a little bit more of my history and how I got here, how I got diagnosed, what led to that. That's episode 1. And episode 2 talks about my accent, how I talk and why I talk, the way that I do, which might give you a little bit of helpful background when you're listening to the episode and wondering, why does she say that? So I highly encourage you to listen to at least the first 2 episodes if you have not done so already. Today we are going to be talking about belonging and community, and I just want to give a little trigger warning. Might seem a little off base, but you'll figure it out when I get there. We are going to be talking a little bit about cults and cultish behavior. So if that is a trigger for you, I recommend you skip this episode. Okay, so let's get started. I don't know about you, but I have felt like I did not belong in most places that I have been in, growing up as an adult. And I don't know if that's specifically to do with being autistic or having ADHD, but I think that is a big barrier to feeling like you belong. I understand that a lot of people feel this way, but when you have barriers to fitting in, such as sensory issues, saying, quote unquote, the wrong thing, finding it difficult to connect with your emotions and therefore other people's emotions, I think that can put a lot of barriers in place to making friends and just feeling like you belong in a space. Even if the people around you feel like you belong and have taken you in, you may still feel inside, I don't belong. They don't know who I am. I don't know who they are. I don't know where I fit in. And that is something that I felt most of my life, that I'm a little bit of a loner, little bit of can just be friends with one particular person who gets me. Especially in the workplace, very difficult for me to feel like I belong. I usually connect to one person that understands me, or I feel like understands me, but on a whole has been difficult to connect in a group setting. There have been a couple of times in my life where I felt like I did fit in and I did belong, and I want to discuss those a little bit. The first one is not about cults. The second one is going to talk a little bit about cults and cultish behavior. So if you continued and you have that trigger warning, I will give the trigger warning again before I discuss cults, okay? So the first place I felt like I belonged, I had actually in college, I'm a UK citizen, born and bred, naturalized US citizen, but in college, when I was in the UK, I became an exchange student and I got a full ride scholarship to go to UC Berkeley for 1 year as an exchange student. And when I went there were a couple of different places you could live, like dormitories. I guess you could get your own private residence. The one I picked was the student co-ops. So it's a non-profit that basically buys hotels, convents, large buildings, and houses students in them. And you live together. And you cook for each other, you clean public spaces, you kind of are in this community together. And I picked a place after reading a bunch of reviews from other exchange students from my college who'd been there. And I picked a place called Stebbins at UC Berkeley. And it was, I think at the time I was there, 64 people in a converted hotel. So you would live in a room with another person like a dorm in America, but there were a lot of different people, which usually I would not enjoy. I don't like spaces where there's a lot of people that I have to get to know. But I have to say that this was maybe the first place I ever felt like I belonged. Ever felt like people understood me. They got me, I got them, and I connected with people. And I think there's a few different reasons for that. I think leaving my own culture of the UK where even though we speak the same language in the US, you do in the US, it's a very different culture living in a European country, living in the UK. And I think moving to the US, I was able to remove myself from all those feelings of not belonging, remove myself from the general culture I'd felt I didn't belong in, and kind of reestablish myself. I also think there was a newness and excitement from it that fed my ADHD, going somewhere new, having this experience, and I think also being around Americans who maybe hadn't met British people before or rarely. I was new and exciting, and so it was exciting for us to engage with each other, and maybe that communal aspect that was a little bit hippie-ish, it's a little bit of a kind of down and dirty community, was how I am. I'm not into this kind of, formal society. I do like knowing the social norms and rituals and things that I need to do, but this kind of formal society where I have to dress a certain way, talk a certain way, I find very difficult to engage with, and I always felt that in the UK, and I'll speak real briefly about a little bit why I felt that. I grew up impoverished in the UK, and I always felt like you could tell, or that I couldn't fit in because I didn't dress right, I didn't speak correctly, I wasn't educated correctly the way other people were. And so I always felt like people knew. People knew I was poor. People knew I was really poor and I didn't have those airs and graces that other people had. And when I moved to the US, because I'm English, everyone looked at me as English, not as a poor person. They looked at me as even kind of a posh person, that I wasn't impoverished, because a British accent in America comes off as, very Mary Poppins-ish, you are this and that. But in the UK, everyone knew, just by talking to me and being around me, that I was poor. And so I think it was a chance to reinvent myself almost, and there weren't all these judgments. And even if there weren't these judgments in the UK, I always had this kind of bias on myself that I felt there were these judgments. Even if people weren't thinking it, I thought they were. And so that was the first place that I really felt like, wow, I belong. I have friends. I have a community. People get me. I get them. And we can hang out and it's easy. And that was the student co-ops at UC Berkeley. It was a very good community. Like I said, this isn't the community I'm talking about that was a little bit cultish. It didn't have that vibe. It was very democratic. We voted on all different things we wanted to do, but also acknowledged and accepted dissent in the ranks. If people didn't want to do something or felt like something was wrong, we accepted that and talked about it. It wasn't this kind of strange environment. Just a little bit hippie-ish, a little bit funky, cool vibes. Now I'm going to talk about the place that I referenced prior, so trigger warning, here it comes. The place that was kind of cultish, that I felt like I belonged in. And I'm going to talk about how they kind of induct you into the community, and why I felt a connection in that community, and why it was difficult to leave. I'm going to be a little bit vague, because this is a job I had, and the company is notoriously litigious about everything and anything, so I'm not going to mention who they are, and I'm going to be very vague about what I was doing as a job. Sorry if that's frustrating, but I just feel I need to do that to protect myself. So after graduating, I graduated in the UK, had to go back there after my exchange year at UC Berkeley. I came back and married my now husband. And you cannot work for the first 18 months, I think, after you come over on the fiancé visa. So I was volunteering, interning, doing lots of artsy stuff. That's what I wanted to do. I decided after college. I got my degree in anthropology and cultural studies and decided I wanted to go back to the arts. Well, right when I got my work authorization, which is kind of like a visa, I got my first job, and it was sales in an artistic community. That's as far as I'm going to go on explaining what that job was. Sales in an artistic community. And if you know anything about sales jobs, it's very common. I don't think I've ever heard of a sales job that wasn't a little bit culty. And for anyone who's a fan of the podcast, A Little Bit Culty, yes, that is a reference. I'll talk about them later. But it always is that way. They have to kind of get you to believe something so that you were willing to manipulate other people into giving you money. And so they use a classic procedure of induction into this kind of cult, which when you talk about really terrible cults, you know, the ones where people kill themselves en masse, commit suicide, kill other people. In Africa right now, there's a starvation cult where people were starving themselves to death. Sex cults where, you know, you get into it and 5 years later you're having sex with some uggo dude that you had no plan to do, but all of a sudden that's what you're doing. They all use the same procedure of induction. And of course, when you start, it's all very exciting, very nice and fluffy. So the first thing they do is they don't train you in sales. They don't train you in the psychological manipulation that you're going to later do on other people. What they do is they put you in the position of the people that you're going to do this to. So you have to manipulate these clients later. They make you a client to show you the good parts of what they're offering. I mean, you wouldn't buy something that you didn't feel had a good aspect to it or a benefit. So what they do at the beginning is they spend about 6 weeks in quote unquote training us, but it didn't train us to do the job. It trained us to experience what a client experiences. All of the good things. We were just having fun with each other in a group of maybe 20 or 30 people that each week would get whittled down because they would let people go who weren't suitable for the position. And I don't even want to know behind the scenes what the discussion was with that about who wasn't going to be good for this culty behavior. And then eventually it was dropped down to like 8 or 6 people over 6 weeks. But we basically were doing really fun activities, experiencing the artistic side of the business, feeling positive changes in our physicality and our mental space. And they would comment on that, right? Like, you can tell that you are feeling this kind of way now. And it's different to how you were feeling before. And it feels exciting and it feels pleasant. And you're losing weight and you're having fun and you've gained these friends. You're feeling so great, right? And we would respond, yes, of course we are. And it super fed into my ADHD side, like I mentioned earlier, which loves newness and excitement and changes in the body and the mind and growth and development. So I was loving this. I thought I'd found my life when I did this. And probably the first red flag that crept in, which happens, I don't know if it happens early, but it happens at some point, and that's when you know you've lost the plot a little bit, is when the red flag comes up and you kind of know it's a red flag and you go, that's weird, or you know it in your mind, there's a little something right there, and you push it aside and you let it go because of the good things you're experiencing. You decide it's better to stay than to go, that the good outweighs the bad. And what happened is we were being trained, and the owner of the business said, so here's what's going to happen. You are changing physically, emotionally, and mentally. You're dressing different for work, because in sales you usually have to dress really formally and nice, and maybe a lot of these young people like myself hadn't before. Remember back, I was a hippie. You might have changed mentally because you've gone deep in this 6 weeks into a whole new company and experience, and your family and friends are going, interesting, you're really deep into this. And maybe you're losing weight, or, there's all kinds of changes happening to you. And they said, here's what's going to happen. Family and friends that you've known for a long time are going to start commenting on this and being worried about you and saying negative things about us and the business. And they weren't wrong. And I'll get more to that later because my husband did not like what I was doing. And he said, the owner of the business said, but here's the thing, those people, you need to ignore what they're saying and move forward with us and what you're doing. And if you need to isolate yourself, he didn't use the word isolate because that's too, gets in your mind. You need to, maybe distance yourself or not speak to them as much or not tell them what you're doing because they are going to judge you for it. And it's because they don't get it, right? And if anyone listening knows anything about cults, it's one of my special interests. This is red flag 101 cults, isolating you from people who've loved you and known you for a long time and know you and know who you really are. And they're just concerned about you. They're just saying, wow, you're changing a lot, for this business and for a job. I'm just a little concerned about you. And they were encouraging us to distance ourselves from those people. That was the first red flag. And I remember sitting there and thinking, well, I'm not going to do that. I have a husband, right? And I'm going to be with my husband. But maybe I won't tell him you said this. And I brushed it off and continued forward with my training. That's when the training in the psychological manipulation started. So basically they start to teach you, because it's a sales job, how to get people to give you their money even when they don't have the money to give you, right? So they teach you how to pull on people's heartstrings, give them what we had, this amazing experience, and then say something like, oh, but if you don't keep buying this experience, you're going to be without it. And then what are you going to do then? You told me you loved this and this was changing your life, so you're going to give this up now? They taught us to guilt people. And there was a moment, and I left 9 months. Actually, I'll preface that. I left 9 months after I started this job. But maybe 6 months in, where we would get training all the time, we were having a training activity, and they had us stand in a circle, and we were talking about, or they were telling us, about how we have to do the emotional stab. And what the emotional stab is, like I just said, you say, well, you've told me that you really enjoy this and it's changed your life. So if you don't keep doing this, you're going to lose out on this. And they said, and that's the emotional stab. And I swear to God, I left my body and floated up out of my body when the next thing happened. The manager who was in the circle, this isn't the owner, this was someone who's trained by the owner. The manager is standing there in the circle and says, and now we're going to stab them. Emotional stab. And they took their hand in a fist, like they were holding a knife, and thrust it into the middle of the circle and told us, or maybe they didn't even say, it was just acknowledged by the body language that we should do the same thing. And we started going, stab, stab, shouting stab, while we physically thrust our hands into the circle. And I swear to God, I floated up out of my body and looked down at this circle and had an existential crisis. Just thought, what am I doing? What is happening? And I think that was probably one of the things that really led to me leaving, that was so disgusting and scary to me. And thankfully my body reacted in the correct way to be like, this is crazy sauce, this is nuts. This is red flag number 12. Get the hell out of here, right? That being said, because of all the good things I was feeling, and I'd felt like I found my passion in the other area of the business, not the sales, but what I was selling, I really did believe in it. It was really difficult to leave. I mean, 9 months maybe doesn't sound like a long time, but I was so deep in this, it was starting to cause problems in my marriage because my husband saw what was happening. He was on the outside. He could tell this was Nutter Butters. He could tell, I've lost my wife to this. You need to get out. You're better than this. But I'd found my newfound passion, so it was really difficult. And I was fighting this I wasn't going to drop my husband, but I was telling him, no, you're wrong. You're wrong. I have found the thing that I love. I know the sales are bad, but if the selling is bad, maybe if I just stick with it, then I can get out later and move into a new thing and do da-da-da-da-da. And he was just not having any of it. And I think back now, thinking about cults, if I had met him at that job, I might have been in a very different position now than I was back then, if he was believing the same thing. Because you're kind of playing chicken at that point. Who's going to bring it up first that we're going to leave? Or that I want to leave, and you seem like you're really into it. But he could see from the outside, this is messed up, dude. Stop doing this. And I'm so grateful for his perspective on it, because in addition to that crazy stab red flag, his intervening and constant bringing this up to me without refrain probably helped me not get too deep and helped me get out of this situation. One of the other red flags that he probably noticed was that he wasn't allowed in the building. They said that because he didn't dress correctly, like I said, it was a sales job, so you had to wear a suit, tie if you're a woman, dress very nicely. Because he didn't dress correctly, he was in sneakers, shorts and a t-shirt, whatever, and he would come and pick me up after work sometimes. They said that he couldn't come into the building. There were times where we had activities outside work, and we were told my husband could not come. And the funny thing is a lot of people were engaged or married who worked there, like I said, red flag, that they met at this job, so they could have their spouse there. I was working sometimes 12 hours a day at this job, didn't see my husband, and then he wasn't allowed to come to the extracurricular activities. So they were really trying to isolate me and really trying to say, that he doesn't get it, so he can't be there. Now, maybe you're thinking, listening to this, what does this have to do with being neurodivergent, with having ADHD and autism, and belonging and community? Well, here's what I think it is. Why I was attracted to it, not just because of the good feelings I had from the positive side that I enjoyed. Here's why. I really like prescribed social norms. This is from the autistic side, because I don't understand social norms. So if I show up to a job or something and they say, this is what you're going to do, this is how it's going to be, we're going to do group activities every day at 1 p.m. and this is the agenda, and then you're going to do this and then you're going to do that. I like that. I like knowing what's going to happen. I like having the expectations laid out. I like being taught how to interact with people. The psychological manipulation techniques that they taught us seemed to me at the beginning to be a way to understand psychology of people. And that was fascinating to me because I always felt like I didn't understand people. I also love when I can understand the rules of engagement. That this is what we expect of you and this is what you should be doing. And as long as you show up and do that, you're good. And I love that. Tell me what I need to do. Tell me what's expected. I'll do it. We're good. We're golden. I fit in. I also like the rituals and procedures, like I just mentioned, that are done every day. So show up at 1 o'clock. We're going to train for an hour in this on a Monday, that on a Tuesday, this Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Then you're going to do this. Then you're going to do that. Then you're going to have a client from 5 to 6. Then you're going to have another one from this to that, blah, blah, blah. Makes it very easy to slot right in and be like everyone else. Feel like you fit in because everyone is doing the same thing. I don't know if this is related to neurodivergency, but I mentioned it prior. I love paths to growth and development. Education in general is one of my super passions for me and other people. I'm in corporate education. I've always been in adult education my almost entire career. And it's one of my intense passions. So if you are saying we're going to train every day, you're going to learn new techniques, I almost don't even care what that is. I just want to know more. And so that is something that really hooked me in. Like I said at the beginning, for the first 6 weeks, it was just learning and experiencing and having fun and growing. It wasn't about manipulating people or selling people or anything like that. But in the end, it wasn't the right thing for me. And really, like I said, I think the two things that just sent me over the edge was that stab, red flag that my whole body and mind just reacted to in such a visceral way. And my husband constantly kind of being, this isn't right. This isn't right. And I really resisted him at the beginning. We were having arguments. We were not doing well. And he really pushed and pushed because he knew it wasn't right. And I'm so grateful for him for that. And so grateful to have listen to my body, listen to what my instincts were telling me. If something comes up and your brain and body says this isn't right, focus on that. Think about that. The only thing that can come out of that is a good thing, not a bad thing. If your body or brain is telling you this isn't right, and actually the thing turns out to be fine, focusing on that is not going to be a bad thing, but it could save your life or get you out of something you shouldn't be in. So I super recommend to focus on your instincts. I think maybe neurodivergent people are afraid that their instincts aren't right. Am I looking at this situation, incorrectly? Am I not reading this situation right? Sometimes maybe you're not. But when it's to do with yourself, not reading other people, reading yourself, you know what you need, and you know what's right for you, and you know what's just wrong in general. All of us know what's wrong. Murder, manipulation, all these horrible things. You know that, and when you experience it, I can almost guarantee that you will feel that and know that. And I'll tell you, when I did leave, it wasn't unlike kind of cult behavior when I left. Look, I wasn't threatened. People didn't come after me, but I did sign a document that I couldn't work elsewhere for about 18 months after that in the same career. And it was a non-compete clause that I said they're very litigious and they do try to enforce that stuff. They didn't talk to me at all. People who'd I'd been great friends with were very shy to talk to me, didn't check in with me. There was one couple, we'd gone as like 3 people, and then they got together while we were there. And I met up with them one time, and it was very uncomfortable. They were in suits and ties and stuff, and I was in a sweatshirt when I met them, and it was just very uncomfortable. And when I handed in my resignation, the owner was very much like, oh, what's wrong? Can't handle it? Trying to put me down, make me feel like the reason I couldn't be there is because I just couldn't hack it. And it was just left me with an ick feeling. The whole thing left me with an ick feeling and still does. And as you can tell, I said I'm not going to talk about who they are because they're very litigious, and I don't think they'd like this to be out there under their name. So like I said, I just want you guys to think about when you're in a place, in a community, where you think you might belong. Try to recognize these ick moments, these moments that you feel in your brain and your soul. Because I didn't feel it at the student co-op. They weren't trying to manipulate me. They weren't trying to make me do things that weren't right. It just felt like I'd belonged. But this one, I knew that it wasn't right. So I just encourage you to really listen to yourself. And you know yourself. You know who you are. You know what's right. And don't ever doubt that you know what's right. Okay? And real quick before we end this episode, I just wanted to talk again about that podcast I mentioned earlier, A Little Bit Culty. The people who run it, who are the hosts, are a married couple who met in a cult and got out. And when I say cult, I mean terrible cult, sex cult, guy is in prison for 125 years, really bad cult, okay? And they don't just talk about cults, they talk about things that are cult-ish, which is why it's called a little bit culty. So they talk about MLMs, they talk about sales businesses, and and also really terrible cults. So if you have any interest in finding out about cults or recognizing those behaviors for yourself, if you're currently in a situation that you're not sure about, and you're not sure whether to trust yourself or what's going on, I highly recommend you listen to some of their episodes. They're really fascinating, and they really get to the crux of what the issue is. And with that, I'm going to end this episode. I hope you enjoyed listening. If you have, I would love for you to leave a 5-star review wherever you're listening, Apple, Google, Spotify. And if you'd like to reach out, I'm available on My Brain is a Wonderland pod on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and Gmail. I'll see you again on My Brain is a Wonderland, Season 2. Have a great rest of your day.